For most of human history, civilizations rose beside rivers, ports, and narrow seas, because survival depended on controlling movement, not ideas, movement. The Athenians fought for the Hellespont. Rome depended on Egyptian grain crossing the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire tightened itself around the Bosporus like a fist. Then the British turned sea lanes into imperial arteries and made distance itself part of global power. Today, more than 80% of world trade still moves by sea, and nearly all of it is compressed through a handful of corridors so narrow that a single grounded ship, missile strike, drought, or naval blockade can ripple through the lives of billions within days. Not because the world is fragile, because it is concentrated. A tanker leaves the Persian Gulf carrying crude oil that will become jet fuel in Frankfurt, plastic in Guangdong, fertilizer in India, and diesel in Kenya. A container ship drifts through monsoon fog in Southeast Asia, carrying lithium batteries, insulin, coffee, copper wire, and machine parts for factories thousands of miles inland. Entire economies move in long, vulnerable lines across water. And that is the part globalization prefers not to show you. The Strait of Hormuz, where oil becomes power. Every modern economy begins here, whether it wants to admit it or not. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and Oman at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, a narrow corridor where some of the largest oil reserves on Earth are forced through a passage barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Around 20 million barrels of oil move through Hormuz every day. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, nearly 1/5 of global petroleum consumption. If the flow slows, fuel prices spike almost immediately. Airlines cut routes. Food transport costs rise. Poorer importing nations absorb the shock first, always first. But then came the deeper problem. Most of the Gulf states built their economies around the assumption that Hormuz would remain open forever. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, the UAE. Their wealth exits through this corridor. So do the industrial dependencies of Europe and Asia. American carrier groups patrol nearby waters. Iran has repeatedly threatened closure during periods of confrontation. In 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis after attacks on oil shipping. Decades later, commercial tankers are still being seized, shadowed, or attacked in surrounding waters. The sea itself looks strangely calm for a place carrying this much pressure. Black tanker hulls move across silver water beneath furnace-colored mountains. Gas flares burn through desert haze at night like industrial campfires. The landscape does not look modern. It looks biblical, salt, stone, fire, and that contrast is what makes Hormuz unsettling. The infrastructure feels futuristic. The vulnerability feels ancient. One missile, one mine-in operation, one regional war, and suddenly the energy system beneath modern life begins to choke. The Suez Canal, the shortcut that rewired the planet. Before the Suez Canal existed, ships traveling from Europe to Asia had to round the southern tip of Africa, a voyage thousands of miles longer through some of the roughest seas on Earth. Then, in 1869, Egypt opened a trench through the desert and changed global trade permanently. But what made Suez powerful in the 19th century is exactly what makes it dangerous now. Concentration. Roughly 12% of global trade passes through the canal today, around 30% of the world's container traffic. Oil, grain, electronics, clothing, industrial chemicals, all compressed into a narrow artificial corridor through desert sand. And then the Ever Given turned sideways. In March 2021, the 1,300-foot container ship became lodged across the canal during high winds, blocking traffic completely for 6 days. More than 400 vessels accumulated at both entrances. Analysts estimated global trade disruptions in the billions of dollars per day, but the image mattered more than the statistic. And that is where the real problem begins. The world economy became optimized for efficiency, not resilience. As if civilization forced the planet to open a passage and now depends on keeping it open forever. The Strait of Malacca, the corridor of manufactured life. If Hormuz carries energy, Malacca carries the modern consumer world. And what passes through it is not abstract trade. Chinese strategists began referring to their dependence on Malacca as the Malacca dilemma, the realization that a foreign navy could theoretically disrupt critical energy imports at one narrow corridor far from mainland China. And once a country starts thinking that way, geopolitics changes. Suddenly, ports matter differently. Islands matter differently. Naval expansion accelerates. Artificial islands appear in the South China Sea. Trade routes become military calculations. At sunset, the strait looks almost peaceful, gulls turning above mosque domes while dark cargo vessels drift beneath suspension bridges linking continents together. But beneath that beauty sits a pressure point connecting NATO, Russia, Middle Eastern trade, and Black Sea exports into one compressed maritime system, and history keeps returning to compressed systems. The Byzantine Empire depended on this waterway until the Ottomans closed around Constantinople in 1453. During the Cold War, Soviet naval access remained strategically tied to Turkish control of the straits. Today, the war in Ukraine has once again pushed Black Sea shipping routes back into global focus. Different century, same corridor. Today, roughly 5% of world maritime commerce passes through Panama. The canal's lock system depends on enormous volumes of fresh water supplied by rainfall-fed lakes. During severe drought conditions in 2023 and 2024, falling water levels forced transit restrictions that slowed global shipping traffic and increased freight costs. Cargo vessels waited offshore for transit slots, while shipping companies rerouted vessels around South America at far greater cost. Delays spread through supply chains already strained by geopolitical instability elsewhere. But the jungle is still there. Digital, seamless, borderless. It looks like tankers moving through narrow water at night, container ships waiting outside drought-stricken canals, naval fleets shadowing trade routes older than most nations, entire populations depending on corridors they will never see in person, long lines of steel crossing thin places in the dark, and the entire global economy is waiting for them to make it through.